In the midst of the chaos of war, Ethan, a brave soldier, finds Scout, a stray dog who becomes his inseparable companion, who on more than one occasion Scout saves the lives of Ethan and some other companions, but unexpected events leave everyone cold. The call to arms. In the quiet town of Clearwater, nestled between rolling hills and sprawling fields, Ethan Rivers lived an ordinary life. A factory worker by day, he often daydreamed about adventure, feeling the pull of a world beyond the confines of his daily routine. His life changed forever when a letter arrived, bearing the official seal of the military. The day was bright when the letter arrived, the sun casting a golden hue over the landscape. As Ethan tore open the envelope, his heart raced. The message was clear: Ethan Rivers, you are hereby called to serve your country. Report to the recruitment office within 7 days. A mix of fear and excitement coursed through him. War was distant, a topic of news reports and films, but it was now very real and personal. Ethan's family gathered that evening for dinner, the atmosphere charged with an unspoken tension. His mother, Maria, a woman of strength and warmth, could barely mask her concern. "Ethan, are you sure you want to do this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Ethan looked around the table at his family. His father, a retired police officer, and his younger sister, Lucy, whose innocence still shone through her bright eyes. "I have to go, Mom. It's my duty," he replied, trying to sound confident. But deep down, he was just a boy trying to be a man in a world that was increasingly chaotic. The next week passed in a blur of preparations. Ethan packed his few belongings, including a small photograph of his family, and shared tearful goodbyes with his friends. When the day of enlistment arrived, he stood at the recruitment office, surrounded by young men and women, all with similar expressions of uncertainty and resolve. Basic training at Fort Harris was grueling. The days were filled with early mornings, endless drills, and the constant sound of shouting sergeants. But through it all, Ethan found camaraderie with his fellow recruits. They shared stories of home, dreams for the future, and fears about the unknown that awaited them. The bond they formed was intense, forged in the fires of hardship and determination. After weeks of relentless training, the day came when they were deployed to the war-torn region of Verdantia. The landscape was stark, a harsh contrast to the lush greenery of Clearwater. As the plane descended, Ethan could see the destruction below: scorched earth, crumbling buildings, and the distant sound of gunfire. His heart sank. This was not the adventure he had imagined. Upon arrival, the reality of war hit him like a cold wave. The base was bustling with activity, soldiers moving with purpose, the air thick with tension. Ethan was assigned to a platoon, led by Sergeant Mason, a no-nonsense leader with years of experience. Mason briefed them on the situation, explaining the hostile forces they were up against and the importance of their mission. One fateful evening, during a routine patrol in a devastated town, Ethan's life would change forever. As his unit searched for enemy activity, they stumbled upon an abandoned building. Curious, Ethan decided to explore the ruins. As he stepped inside, he heard a faint whimpering sound. Following the noise, he found a small, injured dog hiding among the rubble. The dog was trembling, its fur matted and dirty, but its big brown eyes shone with a mix of fear and hope. Ethan felt an immediate connection. "Hey there, buddy," he said softly, kneeling down to the creature. "You're safe now." He reached into his pack and pulled out a piece of his ration. The dog approached cautiously, sniffing the air before devouring the food. Ethan decided to name him Scout. The name felt fitting, given the dog's keen instincts and gentle spirit. From that moment on, Scout became Ethan's constant companion, a beacon of light in the darkness of war. The soldiers in Ethan's unit quickly grew fond of Scout, often laughing at his antics and finding solace in his presence. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan and Scout forged an unbreakable bond. The dog became not just a pet but a morale booster for the entire platoon. When the weight of their circumstances threatened to overwhelm them, Scout was there, offering a wagging tail and unconditional love. Then came a day that would test their bond in unimaginable ways. During a fierce battle, The sounds of gunfire echoed through the air as enemy forces advanced. Ethan's heart raced. Chaos reigned around him. In the midst of the confusion, he spotted Scout darting through the debris, his instincts sharp and focused. Suddenly, the ground shook as an explosion erupted nearby, sending shockwaves through the area. Ethan instinctively called for Scout, his voice barely rising above the din. To his horror, he lost sight of the dog amidst the chaos. Panic surged through him, but he forced himself to focus on his surroundings. In that moment of fear, Ethan realized he needed to trust Scout's instincts. He pressed forward with his unit, fighting fiercely against the advancing enemy. As they maneuvered through the battleground, Ethan spotted Scout up ahead, barking furiously and leading another soldier toward a hidden route away from the crossfire. Ethan's heart swelled with pride. Scout had not only saved his life but had also guided others to safety. In the aftermath of the battle, as they regrouped, Ethan knelt beside Scout, tears of gratitude filling his eyes. Their journey was just beginning, and together they would face the darkness of war head-on. Bonds forged in fire. As the dust settled from the recent battle, Ethan and Scout became inseparable. The chaotic sounds of war faded into a distant hum as the duo navigated the complexities of life in Verdantia. Each day brought new challenges, but with Scout by his side, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. The weeks turned into months, and the harsh reality of war became their daily routine. The platoon moved from one mission to another, often facing treacherous conditions. Scout quickly learned the rhythm of combat, alerting Ethan and his fellow soldiers to potential threats. His keen senses often detected danger long before the humans could. One evening, as they settled into their makeshift camp, Ethan reflected on the bond he had formed with Scout. The campfire crackled, and the soldiers shared stories of home, laughter, and the dreams they held on to. "What do you think they're doing back in Clearwater?" one of the soldiers, Jake, mused, his gaze distant. Ethan smiled, thinking of his family and the quiet evenings spent together. Scout lay at his feet, occasionally lifting his head to listen, as if he understood the importance of these moments. Ethan reached down, giving him a gentle scratch behind the ears. "We'll get back there, buddy," he whispered, his voice filled with hope. Little did he know, their bond would soon face its greatest test. A week later, the unit received intel about an impending enemy ambush in a nearby village. The commanding officer briefed them on the mission, emphasizing the need for stealth. Ethan felt a sense of dread wash over him. This was not just another patrol. The stakes were higher than ever. As night fell, they moved through the dense forest, the moonlight filtering through the trees. Ethan and Scout led the way, their senses heightened. The air was thick with tension, each soldier acutely aware of the danger lurking in the shadows. Suddenly, Scout stopped, his body tense, ears perked. Ethan crouched beside him, heart pounding. "What is it, boy?" he whispered. Scout sniffed the ground, then growled softly, his gaze fixed on a cluster of bushes ahead. Ethan signaled to his comrades to halt. They held their breath, straining to listen. A rustle broke the silence, sending adrenaline coursing through Ethan's veins. Before they could react, a group of enemy soldiers emerged from the underbrush, weapons raised. Chaos erupted as both sides engaged in a fierce firefight. Ethan ducked behind a tree, the sounds of gunfire ringing in his ears. Scout stayed close, weaving in and out of danger, his instincts guiding him as he darted between soldiers. In the heat of the battle, Ethan spotted a fellow soldier, Mark, pinned down and exposed. Without thinking, he sprinted toward him, Scout leading the way. Just as Ethan reached Mark, a bullet whizzed by, striking a nearby tree. Scout lunged forward, barking fiercely, distracting the enemy long enough for Ethan to pull Mark to safety. "Thanks, man," Mark gasped, panting heavily. "I thought I was done for." Ethan nodded, grateful for Scout's quick thinking. Together, they regrouped with the rest of the unit, managing to push back the enemy forces. As the dust settled once more, Ethan realized the toll the battle had taken on his comrades. Several soldiers were injured, and the weight of loss hung heavily in the air. Scout wandered among the soldiers, offering comfort with gentle nudges and warm eyes. His presence was a balm for the wounded spirits, reminding them of the camaraderie they shared. In the days following the ambush, the platoon faced the harsh reality of their situation. Supplies were dwindling, and morale was low. Ethan felt the weight of responsibility not just for himself but for Scout and his fellow soldiers. They needed a victory, something to reignite their fighting spirit. During a briefing, the commanding officer announced a strategic plan to retake a crucial stronghold from the enemy. The operation was risky, but success could turn the tide of the war. Ethan volunteered to lead a reconnaissance mission, confident in Scout's abilities to navigate the terrain. The night before the mission, Ethan lay awake, thoughts swirling in his mind. He glanced at Scout, who was curled up at the foot of his cot, breathing steadily. "What if we don't come back?" Ethan whispered, half to himself. Scout stirred, lifting his head and gazing at Ethan with unwavering loyalty. In that moment, Ethan understood that they were in this together, come what may. As dawn broke, the platoon prepared for the mission. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation, and Ethan felt a surge of adrenaline. They moved quietly through the dense forest, Scout at the forefront, his instincts sharp. With each step, Ethan could feel the bond between them growing stronger. When they reached the stronghold, they quickly assessed the enemy's position. Using Scout's keen senses, they detected hidden traps and potential ambushes. With Ethan's leadership and Scout's guidance, the platoon devised a plan that maximized their chances of success. The assault was intense. Ethan led the charge, moving with determination, Scout at his side. Together, they fought fiercely, pushing through the enemy lines with newfound resolve. As they secured the stronghold, cheers erupted among the soldiers, the taste of victory sweetening the air. Ethan felt a rush of pride wash over him. They had accomplished what seemed impossible, and Scout had been instrumental in their success. The bond they shared had not only saved their lives but had also ignited hope in their hearts. That night, as the unit celebrated their victory, Ethan reflected on their journey. He had entered the war as a factory worker with dreams of adventure, but now he had found purpose, friendship, and a loyal companion in Scout. The battles ahead would surely test them again, but for now they basked in the warmth of triumph, ready to face whatever came next. Shadows of doubt. After their hard-won victory, the mood within the platoon lifted significantly. They celebrated long into the night, sharing laughter and stories around the campfire. Ethan felt a sense of camaraderie that had grown deep among the men and women who had faced danger together. Scout, ever the loyal companion, wandered from soldier to soldier, accepting pats and scraps of food as he basked in the attention. However, beneath the surface of joy, Ethan sensed an undercurrent of anxiety. The war was far from over, and each victory came with its own set of consequences. As the days passed, they prepared for their next mission, one that would take them deeper into enemy territory. Ethan could feel the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders, not just for his own safety but for that of his friends and Scout. The following week, they received orders to infiltrate a heavily guarded enemy supply line. The operation was risky, and the commanding officer briefed them on the potential for heavy casualties. Ethan listened intently, but his mind drifted to the stories of home, particularly those of his sister Lucy, who wrote him letters filled with encouragement and updates about life in Clearwater. He clutched one of her letters in his pocket, drawing strength from her words. On the night before the mission, Ethan lay awake in his tent, Scout curled up beside him. The sounds of the camp settled into a familiar rhythm, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling of dread. He thought about what lay ahead and the possibility that he might not return. "What if something happens to us, Scout?" he whispered, running his fingers through the dog's fur. Scout lifted his head, looking into Ethan's eyes with an understanding that made him feel less alone. As dawn broke, the platoon prepared for the operation. Ethan's heart raced with a mix of excitement and fear. They moved silently through the dense forest, each soldier focused, eyes scanning for any signs of danger. Scout led the way, his instincts finely tuned to the environment. As they approached the supply line, Ethan felt a surge of adrenaline. The stakes were high, and he could sense the tension in the air. The moment they reached their objective, chaos erupted. An alarm sounded, and the enemy soldiers were alerted to their presence. Ethan felt a rush of panic but quickly regained his composure. "Move! We have to secure the area!" he shouted, leading his comrades into the fray. Gunfire erupted around them, and the air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke and fear. Scout sprang into action, darting between soldiers and barking fiercely to distract the enemy. Ethan marveled at the dog's bravery. With Scout's help, they managed to push deeper into the enemy lines, but just when victory seemed within reach, disaster struck. A grenade exploded nearby, sending shrapnel flying and knocking Ethan to the ground. Dazed, Ethan struggled to regain his bearings. He could hear the frantic barks of Scout and the shouts of his fellow soldiers. Pain shot through his leg as he tried to stand, but he forced himself to move. "Scout, where are you?" he called, fear gripping his heart. Through the smoke and chaos, he caught sight of Scout, who was trying to help another soldier, Kyle, who had been wounded. The sight filled Ethan with both pride and worry. "Stay with him, boy," he shouted, but Scout's instincts were pulling him in multiple directions, trying to assist both. Ethan stumbled toward them, determination flooding his veins. He reached Kyle, who lay on the ground, clutching his leg. "You'll be okay, buddy," Ethan reassured him, trying to maintain his composure even as panic surged within him. "Scout's here." Just then, enemy fire rained down around them, and Ethan quickly assessed their surroundings. They were pinned down, and he knew they needed to retreat to safety. "We have to fall back," he shouted to the rest of the platoon, who were also caught in the crossfire. With Scout's help, Ethan and Kyle managed to move back toward their unit. Scout stayed close, nipping at Ethan's hand, urging him onward. Ethan's heart raced as they dodged bullets and explosions, relying on the dog's instincts to guide them. Finally, they reached a temporary cover behind a large boulder. Ethan caught his breath, adrenaline still coursing through him. "Is everyone okay?" he asked, scanning the faces of his comrades. The toll of the battle weighed heavily on them, and he could see the fear etched on their faces. They had lost several soldiers that day, and the weight of their losses hung in the air like a dark cloud. That night, as they set up camp, Ethan felt the heavy burden of guilt settle on his shoulders. The letters from Lucy, filled with hope and love, now felt like a reminder of all that was at stake. "How can I go back to her knowing I might not make it?" he whispered to Scout, who curled up beside him, offering comfort. But Scout seemed to sense Ethan's turmoil. The dog nudged against him, his warm presence a source of reassurance. Ethan realized then that their bond was more than just companionship, it was a lifeline. He needed to stay strong, not just for himself but for Scout and the brothers in arms who had come to rely on him. As the days passed, Ethan found strength in the memories of home and the love of his family. He held on to the hope that one day he would return to Clearwater, to Lucy, and to the life he had left behind. The shadows of doubt still lingered, but with Scout by his side, he felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The heart of the storm. In the weeks that followed the harrowing supply line operation, the atmosphere in the platoon grew tense. The weight of their recent losses hung over them like a dark cloud, but they were determined to push forward. Ethan felt the responsibility of leadership heavier than ever, and with Scout at his side, he resolved to protect his comrades and make the most of their remaining time together. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an orange glow across the camp, Ethan gathered the soldiers around the fire. "I know things have been tough," he began, his voice steady. "But we're a family here. We need to support one another, share our fears, and remind ourselves why we fight." The soldiers nodded, some murmuring words of agreement. Scout sat at Ethan's feet, ears perked, as if he understood the gravity of the moment. "Tomorrow, we're heading out on a recon mission. It's crucial we gather intel on enemy movements. We can't let fear dictate our actions, Ethan continued, trying to instill a sense of purpose in his comrades. As the night deepened, the sounds of the forest surrounded them, a reminder of the life outside the war. Ethan found solace in the crackling fire and the camaraderie of his fellow soldiers. He thought of Lucy, of the laughter they shared, and how much he longed to return home to her embrace. The next morning, the platoon set out under a clear sky, tension still palpable in the air. They moved carefully, Scout leading the way, his instincts finely tuned to the environment. As they navigated through dense underbrush and rocky terrain, Ethan felt a sense of purpose building within him. They had a mission, and he was determined to see it through. After hours of trekking, they reached a vantage point overlooking an enemy encampment. Ethan signaled for the platoon to halt, his heart racing as they set up a perimeter. From their hidden position, they could see the enemy soldiers milling about, unaware of the eyes watching them. "Scout, stay close," Ethan whispered, knowing how vital the dog's instincts would be in the event of an unexpected turn. They observed the enemy for several tense minutes, gathering as much information as they could. Suddenly, a loud explosion echoed through the air. Ethan's heart dropped. "What was that?" he asked, his eyes scanning the area. The soldiers immediately dropped to a defensive position, adrenaline surging. They quickly realized the sound was coming from a nearby village, and it was clear the enemy was up to something. Ethan's instincts kicked in. "We have to move," he shouted, rallying his comrades. They quickly descended from their vantage point, hoping to reach the village before more destruction could occur. Scout charged ahead, leading the way through the underbrush with remarkable agility. As they approached the village, the sight that met them was chaotic. Smoke billowed from several buildings, and the sounds of panicked civilians filled the air. Ethan's heart sank. "We have to help them," he shouted, and without waiting for a response, he rushed toward the nearest building. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with fear. Ethan saw families huddled together, their faces etched with terror. He quickly assessed the situation. "Get to safety. We're here to help," he called out, trying to provide comfort amidst the chaos. Scout darted through the building, sensing the panic around him. He nudged children and adults alike, encouraging them to move toward the exit. Ethan marveled at the dog's ability to comfort and guide those in distress. As they worked to evacuate the villagers, Ethan noticed movement outside. A group of enemy soldiers was approaching, weapons drawn. Panic surged through him. "We need to get everyone out now," he yelled, his voice rising above the chaos. With Scout leading the villagers, they managed to push them toward safety. Ethan took a defensive position at the entrance, ready to protect those who could not fight. The enemy soldiers advanced, and he could feel the tension building in the air. Just as the enemy reached the entrance, Scout sprang into action. The dog leapt forward, barking fiercely, and threw himself at the nearest soldier. The sudden distraction caught the enemy off guard, and Ethan seized the moment. He charged forward, adrenaline fueling his movements. Ethan tackled the enemy soldier, wrestling for control of the weapon. They struggled, and in that moment, he could feel the weight of his training come to the forefront. With a swift maneuver, he disarmed the soldier and took him down, but more were rushing in behind. "Scout, come!" Ethan shouted, and the dog, sensing his call, returned to his side. They fought together, Ethan's heart racing as he moved with agility and purpose. Scout darted around, biting at the ankles of the enemy soldiers, distracting them while Ethan took advantage of their confusion. The firefight intensified, but with the villagers safely evacuated, Ethan felt a surge of determination. "We can do this," he shouted, rallying his comrades. They fought with everything they had, pushing back against the advancing enemy forces. After what felt like an eternity, the tide began to turn. Ethan and his fellow soldiers coordinated their movements, using the advantage of the village's layout to outmaneuver the enemy. With Scout's help, they managed to gain ground, driving the enemy back. Finally, after what felt like hours, the last of the enemy soldiers retreated, leaving behind a devastated village but also a sense of victory. The soldiers were exhausted, panting heavily, but relief washed over them. They had saved the villagers, and their bond had grown stronger in the heat of battle. As the dust settled, Ethan looked around at his comrades, seeing the pride in their eyes. They had fought for each other and for those who could not defend themselves. "We did it!" Ethan exclaimed, and a cheer erupted from the group. Later, as night fell, the soldiers set up camp on the outskirts of the village. Ethan reflected on the day's events, the weight of what they had accomplished pressing on him. Scout lay beside him, nuzzling close, a silent reminder of the loyalty that had kept him going. But even amidst their victory, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty. The war was far from over, and with every battle came new risks. Yet he took solace in the strength of their bond, both with Scout and with his fellow soldiers. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. Echoes of war. The days following their victory at the village passed in a blur of activity. The platoon received praise for their bravery, but Ethan knew that recognition meant little in the face of the ongoing war. Each day brought new challenges, and he was determined to keep his men focused and safe. Scout remained a constant presence, his loyalty and instincts proving invaluable. The dog had become a beloved member of the unit, often seen napping in the sun or playing with the soldiers during their brief moments of downtime. But beneath the surface of their camaraderie lay an ever-present tension. The threat of the enemy was always looming, and Ethan felt a growing weight on his shoulders. One evening, as they sat around a fire sharing stories, Ethan noticed Kyle staring into the flames, a distant look in his eyes. "What's on your mind, Kyle?" Ethan asked, concerned for his friend. Kyle sighed heavily, glancing around at the others before speaking. "It's just, I don't want to talk about home. I don't want to think about what happens if we don't make it back," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. The others nodded in agreement, and a somber silence fell over the group. Ethan felt the familiar pang of fear in his chest. "We have to stay positive. Remember what we fought for, the villagers we saved, the lives we protected," he said, trying to instill hope. "We can't let fear consume us." As the fire crackled, Scout, sensing the tension, wandered through the group, nudging the soldiers with his snout, as if urging them to focus on the present. The men chuckled softly at the dog's antics, and slowly the mood began to lift. However, Ethan knew that their next mission would be crucial. Intelligence reports indicated that the enemy was planning a counterattack, and they needed to be ready. The following day, they gathered for a briefing, and Ethan felt a mix of determination and dread as the commanding officer laid out the plans. "We're heading to a strategic point near the border," the officer explained. "If we can secure this location, we'll have a significant advantage. But this won't be easy. Expect heavy resistance." Ethan glanced at his comrades, feeling their anxiety mirror his own. "Remember," he said, trying to boost morale, "we've faced tough odds before and come out on top. We'll do it again." The next morning, they set out early, the air crisp and cool. As they marched through the forest, Ethan kept a steady pace, with Scout running ahead, sniffing the ground and scanning the area. The dog's energy was infectious, and Ethan felt a surge of hope. But as they approached the strategic point, the mood shifted. They could hear distant gunfire and the ominous sounds of warfare. Ethan's heart raced as they neared their destination, knowing that danger lurked just beyond the tree-line. Suddenly, an explosion rocked the ground, sending debris flying. "Take cover," Ethan shouted, instinctively grabbing Scout and pulling him behind a tree. They crouched low, heartbeats echoing in the tense silence that followed. Through the smoke, Ethan saw enemy soldiers advancing, weapons drawn. He could feel the adrenaline pumping through his veins as he signaled to his platoon to prepare for engagement. "On my mark," he called, adrenaline surging as he held his breath, waiting for the right moment. As the enemy drew closer, Ethan raised his weapon and shouted, "Now!" The soldiers fired in unison, the crack of gunfire shattering the stillness of the forest. Scout sprang into action, darting between the trees, barking loudly to distract the enemy. The battle unfolded in a chaotic flurry of movement and sound. Ethan focused on the enemy, his training kicking in as he moved with precision. He could hear the shouts of his comrades and the echoes of gunfire, but he kept his eyes on the target. During the skirmish, Ethan caught sight of Kyle, who was pinned down behind a boulder, returning fire but clearly struggling. "Kyle!" Ethan shouted, pointing toward him. "We need to get to him." Scout instinctively picked up on Ethan's urgency and sprinted toward Kyle, barking to draw the attention of the enemy. "Go, Scout!" Ethan yelled, racing after the dog. Ethan reached Kyle just as the enemy soldiers began to close in. "We have to move," Ethan urged, helping Kyle to his feet. Scout barked furiously, keeping the enemy occupied long enough for Ethan to pull Kyle to safety. Just as they found cover behind a nearby tree, another explosion erupted nearby, knocking Ethan off his feet. He landed hard on the ground, dazed, and instinctively reached for Scout. "Scout!" he called, his voice strained. The dog, unfazed, jumped up, running back to Ethan and nudging him with his snout. "Good boy," Ethan said, taking a moment to collect himself. He could feel the chaos around him, the shouts of his comrades blending with the sounds of battle. Pushing himself to stand, Ethan glanced around to assess the situation. They were outnumbered, but the determination in his comrades' eyes fueled his resolve. "We can't give up. We fight for each other," he shouted, rallying the troops. With renewed determination, Ethan and Scout led the charge back into the fray. They fought with everything they had, but the odds were stacked against them. Just when it seemed the enemy was gaining ground, Ethan spotted an opportunity. "We need to flank them," he called out. With a handful of soldiers following, they moved around the enemy's left side. The surprise attack caught the enemy off guard, and they quickly began to retreat. Ethan felt a surge of hope as the tides began to turn in their favor. The battle raged on, but with the element of surprise on their side, they pushed the enemy back, eventually securing the strategic point. As the last enemy soldier fled, a cheer erupted among the platoon. They had done it. They had fought bravely and triumphed against overwhelming odds. Exhausted but exhilarated, Ethan sank to the ground, panting. Scout flopped down beside him, tongue lolling as if to say, "We made it." Ethan looked around at his comrades, a deep sense of pride swelling within him. They had become a family, bound together by shared experiences, sacrifices, and victories. That night, as they celebrated their hard-won victory, Ethan took a moment to reflect. The war was far from over, but they had proven to themselves what they were capable of. With Scout by his side and the strength of his comrades, he felt ready to face whatever challenges awaited them. Bonds of courage. The days following the hard-fought battle were filled with a mix of exhaustion and elation. Ethan's platoon had secured the strategic point, and word of their success spread quickly through the ranks. The men were in high spirits, and Scout had become a local hero, receiving pats and cheers from the soldiers who had witnessed his bravery. Ethan, however, felt the weight of the war pressing down on him. While they had achieved a significant victory, he knew that the enemy would not rest. They would retaliate, and his men would be forced to face even greater dangers. One afternoon, as they regrouped to discuss their next moves, Ethan gathered his comrades around a makeshift table in their camp. "Listen up," he began, his tone serious. "We've got to prepare for the enemy's counteroffensive. We've proven ourselves, but we can't let our guard down." The soldiers nodded, the mood shifting from celebratory to focused. They began discussing strategies, sharing ideas and concerns. Kyle spoke up, his voice steady. "We need to fortify our position. If they come at us, we can't let them breach our defenses." Ethan agreed, feeling a sense of responsibility to lead his men through the uncertainty. "Let's divide into teams. We'll scout the surrounding area for resources, build barricades, and ensure we have a solid defense." As the soldiers set to work, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. He partnered with Kyle and a few others to gather supplies from the nearby village. While there, they encountered grateful villagers, who offered food and shelter in return for their protection. It was a stark reminder of why they fought, their role as guardians of those who could not defend themselves. Scout trotted alongside them, his playful energy lifting their spirits as they interacted with the villagers. They shared stories, laughter, and moments of camaraderie, a brief respite from the grim realities of war. But even in those moments of joy, Ethan could not shake the feeling that danger lurked just around the corner. As night fell, they returned to camp, the weight of their mission pressing on them. Ethan gathered the soldiers for a final briefing. "We've made progress, but we can't let our guard down. Keep your eyes open for any signs of enemy movement. We'll stand together, and we'll protect each other." The men nodded, and Ethan felt a surge of determination. They were ready to face whatever challenges awaited them. That night, as he lay in his bunk, Scout curled at his feet, Ethan found himself drifting into a restless sleep, filled with dreams of home and the love of Lucy. A few days later, their preparations were put to the test. The sky was overcast as Ethan led a patrol outside their camp, scouting for enemy activity. They moved cautiously, eyes scanning the landscape, and Ethan felt the tension building among his men. Suddenly, Scout froze, ears perked up, body tense. Ethan's heart raced. "What is it, boy?" he whispered, instinctively reaching for his weapon. Scout began to growl low in his throat, signaling something was amiss. "Stay alert," Ethan ordered, and the soldiers fell silent, listening intently. Then, without warning, gunfire erupted from the trees ahead. "Ambush!" Ethan shouted, diving for cover. Chaos erupted as bullets whizzed past, the air filled with shouts and the sounds of battle. Ethan quickly assessed the situation. "Form a perimeter," he yelled, rallying his men. They scattered, taking cover behind trees and rocks, returning fire in a desperate bid to hold their ground. Scout darted between them, barking fiercely, as if encouraging his comrades to stay strong. The enemy soldiers had them surrounded, and the situation was dire. Ethan felt a surge of adrenaline as he led his men in a counterattack. "We need to push forward," he shouted, rallying them with his voice. As they fought back, Ethan spotted Kyle pinned down, taking fire from 2 enemy soldiers. "Kyle!" Ethan yelled, pointing toward him. "We have to get to him." Scout, sensing Ethan's urgency, bolted toward Kyle, barking fiercely to distract the enemy. "Cover him!" Ethan shouted to the others, and they moved as a unit, providing suppressive fire while Scout reached Kyle. Just as Ethan reached Kyle's side, the enemy took aim. "No!" Ethan yelled, instinctively throwing himself over Kyle, shielding him from the incoming fire. He felt the impact of bullets ricochet around him, but they held their ground. "Get up! We can't stay here," Ethan urged, pulling Kyle to his feet. Together, they moved through the chaos, navigating the enemy fire with Scout leading the way, barking and nipping at the heels of the soldiers. Ethan felt a surge of adrenaline, knowing they were fighting for their lives. He and Kyle moved strategically, taking down enemy soldiers one by one. Scout was a blur of movement, darting around, helping to keep the enemies off balance. Finally, after what felt like hours of intense fighting, the tide began to turn in their favor. Ethan rallied his comrades, pushing forward with renewed determination. "We can do this! For each other!" he shouted, and the soldiers responded with a fierce determination. As they closed in on the remaining enemy forces, Ethan's heart raced. They fought together, their bond strengthening with each challenge they faced. And finally, the last of the enemy soldiers retreated, leaving behind a battlefield that was both victorious and somber. Breathing heavily, Ethan looked around at his comrades, seeing their exhaustion but also their triumph. They had fought for each other and emerged victorious once again. Scout, panting but triumphant, wagged his tail as he joined them. In the aftermath of the battle, Ethan took a moment to reflect. They had faced overwhelming odds, yet they had prevailed, proving their strength and resilience. But even amidst their victory, he couldn't shake the feeling that the war was far from over. That night, as they regrouped around the fire, Ethan looked at his comrades, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. "We've fought hard," he said, his voice steady. "But this is just one battle. We have to stay vigilant and continue to protect those who need us." The soldiers nodded, a shared understanding passing between them. They were more than just a platoon. They were a family forged in the fires of war, and together they would face whatever challenges awaited them. Shadows of the past. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan and his platoon settled into a rhythm of vigilance and resilience. Each small victory fueled their determination, but the shadows of war loomed ever closer, reminding them of the fragility of their existence. Despite the camaraderie and occasional moments of levity, an undercurrent of anxiety persisted. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an orange glow over the camp, Ethan sat with Kyle, sharing stories of their homes and dreams for the future. It was a ritual they had developed, a way to escape the harsh realities of their situation, if only for a moment. "I miss the quiet of the countryside," Kyle said, a wistful look in his eyes. "Just sitting by the river, watching the world go by." Ethan nodded, remembering the peaceful afternoons spent fishing with his father. "Yeah, those moments feel like a lifetime ago," he replied. "But we have to keep those memories alive. They're what drive us to keep fighting." Just then, Scout barked, drawing their attention. The dog had been restlessly pacing near the perimeter of the camp, sniffing the air. "What is it, boy?" Ethan asked, rising to his feet. The mood shifted as they noticed the tension in Scout's posture. Without warning, a distant rumble echoed through the trees, followed by the unmistakable sound of gunfire. Ethan's heart dropped. "Get ready!" he shouted, rallying the troops as adrenaline surged through his veins. Within moments, chaos erupted. Enemy soldiers had launched a surprise attack, taking advantage of their brief moment of complacency. Ethan immediately moved into action, grabbing his weapon and shouting orders. "Form a defensive line. Protect the camp." The soldiers sprang into action, instinctively taking cover and returning fire. Ethan felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, knowing that he had to lead them through this unexpected crisis. Scout dashed into the fray, darting between the soldiers, barking fiercely to keep their spirits high. Ethan caught sight of Kyle, who was already in position, firing at the advancing enemy. "Kyle, cover the left flank," Ethan yelled, moving to assist him. They fought side by side, a well-rehearsed unit, but the intensity of the attack was overwhelming. As the battle raged on, Ethan felt a familiar pang of fear. The enemy was relentless, and they were beginning to encroach on their position. "We need to fall back," he called to his men, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Regroup at the supply bunker." The soldiers began to retreat, maintaining their fire as they moved. Scout, ever vigilant, darted between them, barking to guide them toward safety. Ethan felt a surge of pride for the dog's unwavering bravery. They reached the supply bunker, a makeshift structure built from sandbags and wood. Inside, they regrouped, taking a moment to catch their breath. "We hold this position," Ethan declared, glancing around at his comrades. "We can't let them breach our defenses." The sounds of battle echoed outside, the tension thick in the air. Ethan felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "Stay sharp," he said, his voice steady. "We've faced worse odds before." Suddenly, a loud explosion rocked the bunker, sending debris flying. "Get down!" Ethan shouted, instinctively pulling Kyle and Scout close. The walls trembled, and the air filled with dust and chaos. "We need to get out." As the soldiers scrambled to their feet, Ethan caught sight of a familiar figure outside, the commanding officer, Sergeant Daniels, leading a counteroffensive. "Daniels!" Ethan called, rushing toward the entrance. "We need backup!" But before he could reach him, another blast erupted, sending Ethan flying backward. He landed hard, disoriented, the world spinning around him. Dazed, he pushed himself to his feet, searching for Scout. "Scout!" he shouted, panic rising in his chest. The dog had been by his side, and now he felt a deep sense of dread. Just then, he spotted Scout darting through the dust, barking furiously. "Come here, boy," Ethan called, relief flooding through him as the dog bounded toward him, unharmed. But the battle outside raged on, and Ethan knew they needed to act quickly. Regaining his composure, Ethan gathered his men. "We're going to make a break for it. Follow me." He led the charge out of the bunker, their hearts pounding with adrenaline as they emerged into the chaos. The scene was a whirlwind of smoke and gunfire. Ethan's mind raced as he formulated a plan. "We need to flank them," he shouted, pointing toward the left side where the enemy was regrouping. With Scout at his side, Ethan led the way, navigating through the chaos. They moved stealthily, darting between cover as they approached the enemy's position. Just as they were about to engage, Ethan noticed a group of enemy soldiers setting up a machine gun. "Now!" he shouted, leading his men into action. They charged forward, catching the enemy off guard. Ethan felt a rush of adrenaline as they fought fiercely, pushing back against the overwhelming odds. As the battle unfolded, Ethan fought alongside his comrades, the bond they had formed evident in their synchronized movements. Scout was a blur of motion, darting between soldiers and helping to distract the enemy. The tide of battle began to shift in their favor. The enemy, realizing they were being outflanked, started to retreat. Ethan felt a surge of triumph as the last of the enemy soldiers fled, leaving behind a battlefield marked by their courage. Breathing heavily, Ethan looked around at his comrades, a sense of pride swelling within him. They had once again fought bravely and triumphed against all odds. But amidst their victory, he could see the weariness etched on their faces. That night, as they gathered around the fire, Ethan reflected on the chaos of the day. "We've faced so much," he said, his voice steady. "But through it all, we've stuck together. We've proven our strength as a team." Kyle nodded, his expression serious. "But we have to be prepared. This war isn't over yet. We can't let our guard down." Ethan agreed, knowing that the challenges ahead would test their limits. But he also felt a deep sense of gratitude for the bonds they had formed. They were more than just soldiers. They were a family forged in the fires of war. As Scout lay curled at Ethan's feet, he felt a sense of comfort. They would face whatever lay ahead together, and together they would overcome the shadows of war. The weight of loss. In the days that followed their hard-fought victory, Ethan and his platoon were tasked with securing a new area of the front line. The atmosphere in the camp was tense. Each soldier carried the weight of their experiences, their camaraderie now tinged with the harsh reality of war. Though they had triumphed, the cost had been high, and Ethan felt the shadows of loss creeping in. One evening, as they sat around the fire, Ethan noticed a distinct change in Kyle. He had been quiet, his usual light-hearted demeanor replaced with a heavy silence. Ethan decided to check in on him. "Hey, Kyle," he said softly. "You okay?" Kyle looked up, his eyes reflecting the flickering flames. "Just thinking about home," he admitted, his voice low. "About how different things are now. I never imagined I'd be here, fighting like this." Ethan nodded, understanding all too well. "It's hard. But we're not alone in this. We have each other, and we've made it through a lot together." Scout, sensing the tension, padded over to Kyle and nuzzled against him, offering comfort. Kyle chuckled softly, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. "You're right, Scout. Always bringing a little light into the darkness." As they shared stories and laughter, a sudden gunshot rang out, shattering the moment. The soldiers froze, their instincts kicking in as they scrambled for cover. "Get down!" Ethan shouted, heart racing. The sounds of distant gunfire echoed in the night, a stark reminder that danger was always lurking. "Sergeant," a soldier called, urgency in his voice. "We have movement at the perimeter." Ethan took a deep breath, quickly regaining his composure. "Kyle, stay with Scout. Keep an eye on things here. The rest of you, with me." They moved stealthily toward the noise, hearts pounding in unison. The darkness felt oppressive, the air thick with tension. Ethan signaled for silence, and they crept forward, eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of the enemy. Suddenly, a flurry of movement erupted ahead. Ethan recognized the silhouette of an enemy soldier and instinctively raised his weapon. But just as he was about to fire, he noticed a flash of familiar colors. It was a soldier from a neighboring platoon, tangled in a fight with the enemy. "Hold your fire," Ethan shouted, hoping to redirect his men's aim. They needed to assess the situation carefully. "We can't risk hitting our own." With a quick burst of adrenaline, Ethan sprinted forward, shouting, "Hey! We're here to help." The enemy soldier was clearly outnumbered, and the tension in the air intensified as Ethan's team rushed in. Together, they fought valiantly, the sounds of gunfire blending with shouts of encouragement. Ethan felt the adrenaline coursing through him, pushing him to protect his comrades at all costs. They managed to overpower the enemy soldiers, sending them retreating into the darkness. Breathing heavily, Ethan turned to the neighboring soldier. "You good?" he asked, concern etched on his face. "Yeah, just caught off guard," the soldier replied, wiping blood from his brow. "Thanks for the save." Ethan nodded, grateful for the teamwork that had pulled them through. As they regrouped and returned to their camp, a sense of unease settled over him. The night had reminded him of how fragile life could be, and he couldn't shake the feeling that their next challenge was imminent. As the days rolled on, Ethan sensed a shift in the atmosphere. The air grew thick with tension, and rumors of an impending offensive began to circulate among the troops. They were restless, anxiety simmering just beneath the surface. One night, as Ethan lay awake, he heard Scout whimper softly at his feet. The dog seemed restless, sensing the unease in the air. "What is it, boy?" Ethan murmured, reaching down to scratch Scout's ears. "You feel it too, huh?" Suddenly, the distant sounds of artillery echoed through the night, shaking the ground beneath them. Ethan's heart sank. He sat up, knowing that the enemy was preparing for an attack. He quickly roused his men, urgency in his voice. "Get up! We've got incoming!" The soldiers scrambled into action, adrenaline kicking in as they donned their gear and readied their weapons. Ethan felt a mixture of fear and determination wash over him. "We've trained for this," he reminded them, trying to steady their nerves. "Stick together, and we'll get through it." As they positioned themselves for defense, the sounds of the enemy grew louder. Ethan's heart raced as he glanced around at his comrades, each one focused and determined. "Stay sharp. We've faced worse. We can do this." Just then, an explosion rocked their position, sending shockwaves through the camp. Ethan stumbled but quickly regained his footing. "Back to your positions," he yelled, fighting against the chaos. The night erupted into a cacophony of noise, the air filled with smoke and confusion. Ethan led his men into battle, fighting against the overwhelming odds. Scout raced alongside him, barking and nipping at the heels of the enemy, his bravery inspiring the soldiers. The battle raged on, and Ethan fought with every ounce of strength he had. But amidst the chaos, he felt a familiar fear creeping in. Fear of losing another comrade, fear of not being able to protect those he cared about. He pushed the thoughts aside, focusing on the fight at hand. In the heat of battle, he spotted Kyle pinned down by enemy fire, a look of panic in his eyes. "Kyle!" Ethan shouted, sprinting toward him. Just as he reached his friend, a bullet grazed Ethan's arm, pain exploding through him. He grit his teeth but pressed on, refusing to let fear stop him. "Let's move," Ethan urged, grabbing Kyle's arm and pulling him to safety behind a nearby barricade. "We need to regroup." As they caught their breath, the sounds of battle faded slightly. Ethan could see the weariness in Kyle's eyes, the toll of the war heavy on both of them. "We can't give up, Kyle," Ethan said, his voice steady. "We fight for each other. We fight for all of this." Kyle nodded, determination sparking in his eyes. "You're right. Let's push forward." Together, they rallied their comrades, leading the charge back into the fray. The tide of battle began to shift, their combined strength pushing back the enemy. Ethan felt a renewed sense of hope, his heart racing as they fought side by side. Finally, as dawn broke over the battlefield, the last remnants of the enemy retreated. Ethan stood panting, surveying the aftermath. They had endured yet another harrowing fight, and though they had lost some good men, they had triumphed once more. Exhausted but relieved, Ethan gathered his remaining comrades. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with pride. "We stood together, and we made it through." As the sun rose, illuminating the scars of battle, Ethan felt a profound sense of gratitude for his comrades, for Scout, and for the bonds they had forged in the fires of war. But he also felt the weight of loss pressing heavily on his heart. That night, as they sat around the fire reflecting on their journey, Ethan knew that the war was far from over. But he also knew that together they would continue to fight, facing whatever challenges lay ahead, united in their determination to protect each other. The turning tide. In the aftermath of the fierce battle, Ethan and his platoon found themselves in a fragile state of recovery. The losses they had suffered weighed heavily on their hearts, and the days that followed were marked by a somber reflection. Each soldier dealt with grief in their own way, and for Ethan, it manifested in a relentless drive to push forward, to honor the fallen by ensuring their sacrifice was not in vain. The camp was quieter than usual, the sounds of laughter and camaraderie dulled by the recent events. Ethan spent hours reviewing their strategies, mapping out their next moves, determined to prevent further loss. Scout, ever vigilant, stayed by his side, sensing the weight of his emotions. The dog's loyalty provided a small comfort amidst the turmoil. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Ethan gathered his men. "I know the past few days have been hard," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "But we can't let fear take hold of us. We have to rise from this. We owe it to our brothers who fought beside us." The soldiers nodded, their expressions a mix of resolve and sadness. Kyle stepped forward, a fire igniting in his eyes. "Ethan's right. We've faced worse odds and come out on top. We need to channel our pain into strength. Let's show them we're not backing down." Encouraged by Kyle's words, the men rallied together, their spirits lifting ever so slightly. They spent the night strategizing and preparing for the next offensive, a plan taking shape to reclaim lost territory and avenge their fallen comrades. As dawn broke, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. They gathered their gear and set out, Scout leading the way, his instincts sharp. The air was heavy with tension, but Ethan could feel the determination radiating from his team. They were ready to face whatever lay ahead. The journey to the front lines was fraught with uncertainty. They moved cautiously through the dense forest, their senses heightened. Every rustle of leaves, every distant sound set their hearts racing. But they pressed on, relying on each other's strength. As they approached a strategic ridge overlooking the enemy's position, Ethan's instincts kicked in. "This is it," he whispered, surveying the landscape. "We'll take the high ground and launch our attack from there." Scout sniffed the air, then let out a low growl, sensing something amiss. Ethan glanced down at his loyal companion. "What is it, boy?" he asked, anxiety creeping in. Before he could process it, an explosion rocked the ground nearby, sending dust and debris flying. "Ambush!" Ethan shouted, instinctively pulling Kyle and the others into cover. The enemy had set traps, waiting for them to approach. Gunfire erupted around them, and chaos ensued as they fought to regain control. Ethan's heart raced as he shouted orders, directing his men to establish a defensive perimeter. "Hold the line. Don't let them push us back." The sounds of battle filled the air, punctuated by the distant howls of Scout as he darted through the chaos, drawing fire away from his human companions. The firefight was intense, bullets whizzing past and explosions ringing in their ears. Ethan fought fiercely, driven by the memories of his fallen friends. With each shot, he felt the weight of their sacrifice, fueling his determination to protect those still standing beside him. Suddenly, amidst the chaos, Ethan spotted a movement to his left, an enemy soldier aiming a weapon at Kyle. "Kyle, watch out!" he shouted, adrenaline surging through him. In a split second, he dove forward, tackling Kyle just as the shot rang out. They hit the ground hard, the bullet missing them by inches. "Are you okay?" Ethan gasped, adrenaline still coursing through his veins. "Yeah, but that was too close," Kyle replied, his face pale. "Thanks, man." Ethan nodded, their bond strengthened by the narrow escape. "We need to keep moving," he urged, helping Kyle to his feet. They regrouped with the rest of the platoon, pushing forward against the enemy's assault. As the battle raged on, Ethan felt a strange sense of clarity wash over him. He realized that this fight wasn't just about survival, it was about reclaiming their dignity, their purpose. They were not merely soldiers, they were protectors, fighting for each other, for their shared humanity. Finally, after what felt like hours, the tide began to turn. The enemy, caught off guard by their tenacity, started to falter. With a surge of determination, Ethan shouted, "Now! Let's finish this!" Together, they charged forward, pushing back against the enemy line. Scout raced alongside them, barking and nipping at the heels of the soldiers, rallying them onward. In that moment, Ethan felt an overwhelming sense of unity, their strength combined against the chaos. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the last remnants of the enemy retreated, leaving behind a battlefield marked by their bravery. Ethan stood amidst the aftermath, heart pounding, the adrenaline slowly fading. They had fought fiercely and reclaimed their position. Breathing heavily, he turned to his men. "We did it," he said, voice filled with pride. "We stood together, and we won this battle." But even as they celebrated, Ethan felt the ache of loss lingering in his heart. They had endured another fight, but the cost weighed heavily on him. He glanced around at his comrades, grateful for their survival, but painfully aware that the war was far from over. That night, as they gathered around the fire, Ethan reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. They were stronger than ever, bound by their shared experiences and the sacrifices they had made. As Scout lay at his feet, Ethan felt a renewed sense of hope. They would face whatever challenges lay ahead, united in their determination to protect each other and honor the memories of those they had lost. Homecoming. In the weeks following their hard-fought victory, Ethan and his platoon continued to build upon their momentum. They were tasked with a series of operations that pushed deeper into enemy territory, reclaiming ground that had once seemed lost. Each day brought new challenges, but with each challenge came a renewed sense of purpose. Ethan felt a growing bond with his men, each soldier not just a comrade but a brother in arms. They had fought together, bled together, and now they were standing together against the odds. Scout, ever loyal, was right by Ethan's side, bringing joy and a sense of normalcy to the chaos of war. One day, as they prepared for another mission, the atmosphere was unusually light. "Hey, remember that time Scout chased off those wild boars?" Kyle laughed, recounting a harrowing yet hilarious incident from a previous week. The camp erupted in laughter, a rare moment of levity amidst the tension. "That dog has no fear." Ethan chuckled, ruffling Scout's fur. The dog looked up, tongue lolling, as if basking in the attention. As the days turned into weeks, the tide of war shifted. The enemy, increasingly demoralized by their losses, began to retreat. With each victory, hope blossomed among the soldiers. They could see a glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel, a possibility of returning home. One crisp morning, word arrived that their unit was being pulled back for reassignment. Excitement buzzed through the camp as the realization set in: they were going home. Ethan felt a surge of emotions: relief, joy, and an underlying anxiety about what awaited them. As they packed their gear, Ethan took a moment to reflect. He thought of all they had endured, the friends they had lost, and the bonds they had formed. Each moment was etched in his memory, a testament to their resilience. Finally, the day arrived when they boarded transport vehicles, their hearts racing at the prospect of returning to their families. Scout, sensing the excitement, barked happily, leaping between the soldiers, as if celebrating the end of their long journey. The ride back was filled with anticipation. They shared stories, laughter, and tears, reflecting on their time together. Ethan felt a sense of gratitude for the men beside him, for the unwavering support they had provided each other. As they crossed the border into familiar territory, Ethan's heart raced. The landscape changed, familiar sights igniting memories of home. He thought of his family, the friends he had left behind, and the life that awaited him. But with every mile, he felt a pang of anxiety. Would they understand? Would things have changed too much? When they finally arrived at the base, the atmosphere was electric. Families gathered, waiting for their loved ones to return. Ethan stepped off the vehicle, heart pounding. In the crowd, he spotted his mother, her eyes filled with tears of joy. "Ethan!" she called, breaking through the throng. He rushed toward her, enveloping her in a tight embrace. "I'm home, Mom," he whispered, emotion welling up inside him. Scout bounded forward, tail wagging, and jumped up, licking Ethan's mother's face. Laughter erupted around them, the warmth of love flooding back into his heart. As Ethan reunited with his comrades, he noticed Kyle hugging his younger sister tightly, both of them crying tears of joy. The scene was a beautiful chaos of emotions, families embracing, laughter mingling with sobs, a testament to their survival and the strength of their bonds. In the days that followed, Ethan settled back into civilian life, but the memories of war lingered. He often found himself staring out at the horizon, remembering the struggles and the sacrifices made. It was a journey that had changed him profoundly. Scout became a beloved member of the family, a constant reminder of the loyalty and bravery they had shared. The dog had saved his life more times than he could count, and now he lay at Ethan's feet as he recounted tales of their time together to family and friends. Ethan also made it a point to honor the memories of his fallen comrades. He started a local veteran support group, creating a space for soldiers to share their experiences and find solace in each other. He knew the importance of healing, both for himself and for those who had walked similar paths. As he stood in front of the group one evening, surrounded by familiar faces and stories, Ethan realized that while the scars of war would remain, they were not a mark of defeat. They were a testament to survival, resilience, and the bonds forged in the fires of battle. "Together, we'll move forward," he said, voice steady. "We carry our brothers and sisters with us in our hearts. We honor them by living fully, by supporting one another, and by finding joy in every moment." And as he looked around at the faces of those who understood, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. They had fought hard, but now they had the chance to embrace life again. With Scout by his side and the support of his comrades, Ethan stepped forward into the future, determined to make the most of every day. War had shaped him, but it was love, friendship, and the unwavering spirit of resilience that would guide him home.